Okay, you guys, I'm already amped up. I'm already excited. I'm like wiggling in my chair. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I think this is a wonderful way to start 2025 with this conversation I'm about to have with this beautiful human being. Because as you'll learn, his philosophy that he follows and that he has written a book about is a cornerstone for humanity. I really truly believe that. And if you listen today and you feel inspired, get the book. I'm already saying get the book. I'm giving it away. So anyway, without further ado, I want to welcome Tanner Campbell. Tanner, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm like a little kid. I can't believe it. I'm like a little kid. Okay, so you guys, the book is a really small, see it's skinny, book called What is Stoicism? A brief and accessible overview. Tanner, I've been telling people I was going to have this conversation with you, and they're like, "Well, a book on Stoicism," and I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's kind of like the Cliff Notes in a way."
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. Yes. Without being too shallow, right? That's what we were going for. Something that was
Yeah, no, and it's your co-author is Kai Whiting, White,
Whiting, Kai Whiting.
Kai Whiting. So you guys put so much thought into this, because I'm three-quarters of the way through. I underline and I take notes and blah, 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 and we'll get into that. But you also have a podcast. I just want everybody to know, we'll put all this in the show notes, but you have a podcast called Practical Stoicism.
I do, yeah.
And you've been doing that for how long?
I started that in 2022, I think. So I
Okay,
guess 3 years. This will be the third year. Is that
3 years.
right? No, this will be the fourth year. All of 2022, all of 2023, all of 2024. I forgot what year it
Cool.
was. This will be the fourth
Well,
year.
I'm telling you guys, you got to listen to this podcast, Practical Stoicism, as well. If you're an audio learner, my husband's an audio visual learner, and he stumbled across your podcast about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, and started listening. And I now listen and I pass on I share it with people when I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what we were all just talking about yesterday, and we need to practice this. So Tanner, let's dive into the what is Stoicism so people know. What is it first?
Sure. It is an ancient Greek philosophy that is also a virtue ethics framework. It is such a full and complete life philosophy. Truly, it has a cosmological branch, it has a logical branch, and it has an ethics branch. So, if you're looking to understand, how the world was made, there is that part of it. They did cover that. If you're looking about how to behave, how best to conduct yourself, how to pursue virtue, which the ancient Stoics defined. First of all, they would have used the word arete, not virtue, because virtue is Latin, and the ancient Greeks did not speak Latin, as it turns out. They call it arete, and they define that as the knowledge of how to live excellently, which is really shorthand for how to live morally excellently. So, Stoicism, you can have a hard time getting this point out of Stoicism with all the bad interpretations of it on the internet, and especially on social media. You can have a hard time realizing that what this really is a philosophy meant to help you become a morally perfect individual, which is their idea of what a sage is. Of course, that's not achievable for us mere mortals, although we still labor under the belief that one could, theoretically anyway, achieve such a state. And if you can't, well, that's great. You've got something to improve every day you wake up because you can always get a little bit better.
Well, so you just said a mouthful in all of that. I want to tease a lot of that out, but I got to start at this last part where it's an ongoing learning process, right? It's because the theme for this year for Empowering Chats is soul growth. And I realized I still show up and do these conversations because I love learning, and everybody I talk to, I'm learning, I'm constantly learning. And so that really is also like a cornerstone of Stoicism, right? That to commit to being a lifelong learner, because the achievement of excellence is, like you said, it's possible to improve, but is it really possible to perfect excellence?
Yeah, the ancient Stoics said that the sage was as rare as the phoenix. Now, philosophers, but in particular the Stoics, and also well, never mind. We'll just stick with Stoicism. Were famously not into the gods of the time. They didn't really
Mm,
believe in the mythological take. Certainly, this is true of the Stoics. And when they say something is as rare as the phoenix, they are, I think, this is my opinion, not everyone shares it. I might be the only one who has it. They are tongue in cheek saying that it is rare, it is as rare as something they don't believe exists.
right,
So you work towards it, as I said, but probably can't actually get it.
right. So, okay, we're gonna come back to that piece too. So
Sure.
let's digress a bit. And so Stoicism, you said, is the knowledge of how to live excellently and morally,
Hmm.
morally. So, which is the thing I adore about this. And in your book, you've condensed it and used real life examples. So it's like to me, it's like a duh. Yeah, why wouldn't I do this? So those are not two different things, how to live a life of excellence and how to live a morally excellent life.
Not for the Stoics. They are the same thing.
Hmm.
Human excellence is perfect moral character.
Right. So what does it take to do a perfect moral character? I mean, what does it take to develop that? Because that
It's
sounds
it's it's
daunting.
easy just by my 10-step program to become morally excellent. It requires the process of uh, examining impressions and only assenting to impressions that you have reasoned through logic are appropriate to assent to or are logically reasonable to assent to. So let's one of the examples believe we use in the book, I've at least used it before, is that if your friend is late to dinner and perhaps all the time they're always late to dinner, you might think, you might be tempted to think, certainly an impression you would have would be, oh, what a flake. They probably didn't even remember. The Stoics would ask that we take a more careful approach before we assent, meaning we commit to and adopt as a belief that impression that our friend is a flake in this instance,
Mhm.
even though they have been in the past, because it could be true that there's been an accident, that there's been some other thing which is out of their control or your control, and that could be the cause of why they're late. So rather than assenting to a false view of the world, and I think this is especially present today,
Yep.
you should try to reason towards what is most likely, but stay flexible and don't think you know the facts until you've got them all. Or because if you stuck with that, you'd never commit to anything, or
Right.
until you believe you've reasoned well enough to assent to that impression and thus adopt that belief. And this
And
is,
I'm sorry, by assent, you mean agree to this.
yes, ASSENT,
Right.
to assent to the impression and believe it, adopt it as a belief. Yeah.
Okay. So I have an example of that because
Yeah.
I've been reading your book.
Go ahead.
So my beautiful, amazing husband loves to sing, and he committed to singing in a Magic Galley group this last year. So he was gone every Sunday night for rehearsal, and
Mm.
and he sings in the choir at church, and so there's more rehearsal. And he just committed to a huge chorale group that's every Monday night. And so last night was his first night, and he comes home and he's telling me, and I found myself going, "Oh, that means he's not going to have time with me. Oh, that means," and here's the story, right? Because it's the story we create that we have, and then is that true? We have it. Where's the reason behind it? What is the reason why I was thinking that? And so instead of saying anything, I just slept on it basically and got up in the morning and realized that that's not true. It's not taking time away from me. It's giving him joy. So
Mm.
so of course I'm going to celebrate that he's doing that instead of feeling like a curmudgeon and going into lack that I don't have more time with him. So
Hmm.
that's a reason. I mean, that was I reasoned it out. I didn't emotionally react like I do often, because
We
I'm
all
a
do.
redhead. Uh, I reasoned it out and came to the what I believe is the honest or correct understanding of what the truth of that particular situation is.
I love that you use the word correct, because you don't necessarily have to believe that it's correct. What the Stoics would want you to do is to at least have put forth the serious commitment to reason that you can rationally justify the position you've taken. So it's
Mhm.
not about being right. It's about, and this is really interesting when you talk about Stoic morals, it's not about being right. It's not about the outcome of your correctness in that case. It's it's more about, when you were presented with the information you had, did you take it in and assess it reasonably? And is the action or belief that you decided to adopt, is it defensible? Is it logically and morally defensible? And if it is, then you've done all you could do. Because to suggest anything else would mean that there was some way we could, with present information and a significant amount of it probably lacking, predict the future, which we cannot do. I mean, aside from the weather, and they have radar and they still get it wrong half the time.
I know they're and they've been getting it wrong a lot this last
Yeah,
year.
yeah, here too in the UK, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. But so, okay. Excuse me. So so you're getting to the nub of really what I would love to tease out about the practice of Stoicism, because it isn't I'm right, you're wrong.
No,
And it isn't, and if you want to live a virtuous life, then you do put in this practice of questioning. And it sounds like it's a very
introspective,
interpersonal
yes. Hmm.
practice, and does require the individual to take self-responsibility.
Ton of it, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then let's go, because you're just kind of on that little edge of what I think we're going to be seeing, or possibly, and I'm willing to be wrong about 2025. I
Well,
am willing to be
that's
wrong.
good. You're not assenting.
I'm
You're
not agreeing with
examining.
any of it.
Mm.
And uh okay, so you said a person who, it's not about being right, it's about assessing information reasonably
Hmm.
and then coming to the agreement that this is the truth for this particular individual.
Well,
Like for,
that this position I'm deciding to adopt, this opinion, this thing that I'm willing to accept as truth, I believe that I have reasoned very well towards it. I've tested it, and I think it's appropriate for me to assent to this impression. Not
okay.
right for me to do it, but appropriate.
So that's part of the ethic piece.
Yes, yeah. That's the part of Stoicism that, uh, I guess the way I would put it is, pop culture has really latched on to, the good and the bad of pop culture has latched on to the ethical, what is called a I almost said tapas. uh, the word escapes me at the moment, but topoi, the
Uh-huh.
topoi of ethics, basically three legs of the same stool. You have ethics, as I said before, logic, and physics, cosmology.
Okay, so let's talk about vice,
Let's talk about it.
because
I don't
if
have
you're
any.
following,
How about you, Susan?
oh
You have
no,
any
I
vice?
got rid of it yesterday.
Yeah,
It's January. No,
it's my
I
New Year's resolution to get rid of my vice.
exactly. But there's this, okay, what we've been seeing oh God, I'm saying it. Tanner, I'm saying it.
You're going to
What
say
we've been,
U.S. politics? Is that what you're going to say?
yeah, what we've been
Oh boy,
seeing, and we don't have
I
to,
gotta go.
but there is where I was not watching reason occurring. I was watching agreement, but it was more not reasoning out what is really
Mm.
true. It might be true for the individual, but is it really true? And I
Well,
don't know that there's the question of, is this really true?
this is why it's right. See, we're not naming any politicians right now. We're not
No,
doing that. We're not taking sides, because
no.
we can genuinely and honestly make a blanket statement about this, because it applies to you, to me, to every person who's not a sage, which is probably everybody. This is why it's so important to be earnest and serious. Well, that's what earnest means, and honest about your reasoning. Because if you think about whatever politician it is that you listening are unhappy with, and you think is the worst. One of the things that, and I don't think Stoicism is the only ancient Greek philosophy, let alone to help you do this, but I think it's the best. Since virtue is the knowledge of how to live excellently, moral knowledge, moral wisdom, vice or badness is the opposite of that. It's ignorance. And the ancient Stoics would have argued that a person like the politician you don't like, whichever one that is the way that they are simply because they are ignorant of what is appropriate, what is virtuous,
Mm-hmm.
which comes down to their inability to reason well and clearly. This is one of the reasons, in fact, why the Stoics were so big on mentorship, because they don't think that this necessarily happens in a bubble. They want you talking to other people who are also on the prokopton path, the path of the progressor, the moral progressor, which is not a unique to Stoicism word, but here it means, the way I'm using it, it means a Stoic progressor. They're moving along the path to sagehood, using the philosophy of Stoicism as their guide, as it were. Yeah, it's they they want you to speak to other people who are trying to use this philosophy, test each other, debate with each other, use reason with each other, logical arguments to figure out what it is that is, in this case, morally appropriate. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes it harder to vilify people in a really dehumanizing sense if you realize that their sin is ignorance and not necessarily evil. I believe it was Plato who said that we don't ever do anything that we don't think is the right thing to do. Otherwise, we would not do it. No matter how morally depraved we might view that thing as being, that person is acting in a way that they have reasoned in their minds is the thing that they're supposed to do. So no matter who the most terrible person ever is, they're doing it because they might know it's illegal. They might know that people will see it as evil. They might even know that other people will think that it's wrong. But they have identified it as the thing that they're supposed to do, which is why they do it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a really interesting thing to have in the back of your head when you start to get geared up about what we're talking about, politics in the U.S. These people are ignorant of moral wisdom, which is the same thing that I'm ignorant of. And so, what's the best way to move forward about in thinking about these things, and how should I conduct myself with that information in the back of my head? It doesn't mean excuse them, because that's probably
Right.
not appropriate. But it
Right.
does give you a different vantage point, and
Right.
probably can do a lot to stop you from getting too angry and too worked up, and yourself, as a result, overtaken by pathos or a passion. And then you become illogical and irrational because you're upset.
Exactly. Exactly. And I appreciate the humility you just exhibited. But
You're welcome.
because I did not hear, as you were explaining all that, and you said, and I'm not necessarily morally
No,
correct either, but you're further along on the path. You're one of those progressors.
I am a progressor, yes, but where I am on the path is, I might be ahead of some others, but I'm certainly far behind others as
Well,
well.
yeah, and that's part of human growth, right?
Hmm.
The soul growth process is we have to continually reassess within ourselves individually, am I following that line of virtue, of integrity, of ethics and morals, or am I digressing and my actions are causing harm or other things? It's interesting how in the book, because you talk about virtue and virtuous, and then
Hmm.
you were talking about vice and viciousness,
Hmm.
vicious. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, how silly is that, Tanner? I didn't put those two words together, but all of a sudden it was like, yes, if you're following a path of vice, of not reasoning out, not really finding what the truth is for you, then your actions do become vicious.
That's another thing that Stoicism helps you to as you get deeper into studying it, it kind of, you arrive at this with, I guess, a eureka or aha moment. And that is that a lot of how people navigate the moral landscape, however you want to interpret that,
Uh-huh.
is with signals and indicators from the outside world. For example, if you're a religious person, the yardstick of your morality tends to be whoever your God is, whichever God you believe in. But that's not what Stoicism does. And if it's not God, well, then perhaps it's society, or perhaps it's a group that you belong to. But it's usually the case that you are looking externally for the indicators, for the yardstick that says whether or not you're being moral. Stoicism says, no, that's not, there's no way to do that. That's not
Mm-hmm.
how it works, because then other people decide whether or not you're moral. And they can't do that because they don't have access to your hegemonicon, your rational faculty, to
Uh-huh.
know what you were thinking when you made your decision. You very well could have made the morally just and appropriate decision, and no one outside of your head would be able to know the reasons behind why you did what you did. They would only be able to see the outcomes. And from the Stoic perspective, the outcome isn't what determines whether or not the choice of the action was moral. It's the logic and reason and intent behind the choice or the action or decision.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the ancient Stoic philosophers is Marcus Aurelius, and he was an emperor, right?
He, he was
And
an emperor. Yeah, he
and so
was.
he had to have there were battles,
Yeah.
right? That he reasoned out and went, okay, we're gonna go for this one.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I just I want every okay, so I personally believe that George Washington practiced Stoicism. He and some of the founding fathers read a lot of the Greek philosophers because those were the books that were available. You know,
Hmm.
those were like the on the New York Times bestseller list kind of thing. And
Yes.
so George Washington was one person that exhibited reasoning things out in the heat of a battle and then choosing a course of action that others may have thought wasn't the right thing to do.
Yes, and I think we should not sell ourselves or other people short. I think that most people are trying to do that. Most people are when they make their decision. I mean, I don't think anybody makes a decision without thinking about, you know, what decision they should make. But Stoicism presents a very, I certainly wouldn't call it narrow, but I would call it complex and
Mhm,
also deep. You're trying to reason towards being what the Stoics called in alignment with nature. And that doesn't mean nature, small n nature, the woods and the trees. Although, hey, that's nice. I like to camp. I like being one with nature. But they're talking about being one with nature, capital N, which was their concept of God, which is the literal entirety of the universe is like an organism of which
mhm,
we are a part, and so we are
mhm,
supposed to be acting in a way that is beneficial to or in alignment with what is best for the body we are a part of, and the way that the Stoics reasoned out that the way a human ought to do their virtuous activity. A rock is virtuous by being a rock. A planet is virtuous by revolving and going around the sun, for example. This is how those things are virtuous. But a human being is virtuous by being morally excellent because we are, as far as we know, the only creatures that have the ability to ruminate about the past, predict the future, and to reason. That is a gift that we seem to have that no one else has to the extent that we do. I know that dolphins, elephants, I think also dogs, pigs, and some other animals have exhibited, chimpanzees, of course, have exhibited some reasoning skills, but not to the extent that we do. And
mhm.
so the true, most natural state of a human being is a perfect moral reasoner. So when you when you're trying to sort out what is the morally appropriate choice in any situation, I'm sure you're familiar with the "What would Jesus do" bracelets. You've
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
seen
yeah,
these.
yeah.
I like to ask myself, what does this say about my character? or what would the sage do? But I think that first one is a lot better. What does this reflect about my character, this choice? So an example of that is, and this is another one we use in the book, we say that a lot of people think that Stoicism is about ignoring those things which you can't control. We can thank Epictetus for that. Seems to be the one part of Stoicism everybody knows, which was more or less Epictetus's thesis. He's kind of the guy who, he didn't call it that, but he essentially said there are things which are up to us, amine, and things that are not up to us. And it's important to discern between the two of those things, or you'll have a very upset life where you're angry at everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's like the foundational. Thank goodness he wrote about that, because that's a foundational piece for so many different philosophies and
Yes,
organizations.
but there's a curveball because it's easy to say that,
Yeah.
and you see this all over social media. Well, you can't control politics. Well, you can't control the weather, so don't care about the weather. Yeah, well, you know what else you can't control is if your mom gets cancer and might die. You can't control that either. But what would it say about the character of someone who just didn't care because they couldn't control that? Would that be a morally appropriate position for one to take about their own mother? Probably not. Now, there are situations where potentially, given the history of the relationship, that might be the appropriate position to take, but that's probably not very often.
Right, right. I love that analogy because I do know, I've met quite a few ostriches in the last year or two,
Yep.
and claiming they don't care, and yet we all do care, whatever side we're on, and I'm talking globally,
Yep.
we
We
all
care.
care, because we're human beings, and there is that desire to be compassionate, or
Mhm.
even practice compassion. So in the saying I don't care and the inaction of not caring, are you
Yeah.
saying, Tanner, that there's a Stoic would actually reason that it's not that I don't care, it's that so if I do care a bit,
Mhm.
then what does that leave me? Where does that leave me? Does that lead me down the path of activism, or down the path of,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It could. It might. Sometimes the answer is to burn down the Capitol. Sometimes that is, and you can look at the Stoic opposition. Historically, there were Stoics who opposed Nero. I would say physically, if not violently. And
Yeah.
a lot of them died as a result of it. And a lot of them were exiled as a result of it. And Nero certainly wasn't the only one to exile philosophers, nor Stoics specifically. Um, but yeah, it's not about what you can or can't control. It is important for you to understand what you can and cannot control so that you don't spend a life in constant pursuit of and in constant frustration with those things which are not up to you, which are not
Mhm.
ephemein, as in Greek, as Epictetus would say.
And you have
And
a chapter on that, the
we do.
dichotomy of control.
Yes,
Um,
it's not a great. That is what it's mostly known as. It's the term we use in the book. William Stevens uses the term the fundamental divide, which I like a lot.
oh
I like
yeah.
to use the dichotomy of choice. Is it a thing we can choose, or is it a thing we cannot choose? And
Oh, I like that better.
if it's a thing we cannot choose, there are two ways to look at it. We can look at it as an indifferent thing, well, I mean, you can look at any even things you could choose as an indifferent thing. An indifferent that is preferred or dispreferred. There's a funny thing about the word indifferent. When it's used in its plural form, it sounds like indifference, like you're not supposed to care. This is another misconception about Stoicism. You're supposed to practice indifference or non attachment. This is not true. That's Buddhism. Well, not indifference, but non attachment is Buddhism. The word is Indifferent, and then you slap an S on the end of that, and it's indifference. There are multiple indifferent
Multiple.
things. They are indifference. But when you're saying the word out loud, people think you're telling them not to care about stuff. So you can look at indifferent things as being preferred. That is to say, things which you would like to pursue and which pursuing will not damage your moral character. So
Yeah.
let's say you want to make $1 million. A lot of people would say that's not stoic. Well, can you earn $1 million without being a morally unjust person? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you can pursue $1 million and it doesn't matter what anybody says. But if
Mhm,
you can't, then that becomes the preferred indifferent of wealth becomes a dispreferred indifferent,
mhm.
where you can't pursue, you shouldn't pursue it. You certainly still could, but you shouldn't pursue it because it will do damage to your moral character, which is the whole point of, it's what the thing you're trying to develop, which is how you, I guess you could say moral character is the reflection of or the shadow of the possession of virtue, of perfect moral knowledge.
Okay. So, so Tanner, what are a few practices we can do right now to begin to develop our virtue, our moral character, our ethical foundation? What are some practical things?
Yeah. So you can listen to my, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to say
Seriously,
that.
no, what he just said, what Tanner just said, you can listen to his
You
podcast,
can.
absolutely.
And please do, because I'd love to have you. I think maybe we could be of use to each other. I certainly
Yeah,
learn things from my audience all the time. There are people who listen to the show who know a lot more about Stoicism than I do, which I always find very helpful.
yeah.
A lot of people will answer this question first with journaling, because I think this is probably because Marcus Aurelius's Meditations was a journal. And so I guess journaling, Seneca, of course, also wrote famously letters and also plays, which people are less aware of. And so somehow these not journalistic, but journal writings are somehow associated with Stoicism. And I just wrote an article on this. Journaling is not a Stoic activity. Nothing is a Stoic activity. Uh, the only Stoic activity is the pursuit of virtue. And if journaling can help you do that, and you reason that it will be beneficial, and you can take on journaling for 15 minutes a day without having to abandon some other moral responsibility of yourself, like feeding your kids dinner or packing their school lunches, then by all means pursue journaling. And it's a great practice. I don't journal myself. I have a journaling program that I'm building to help other people journal, quote unquote, stoically. That's kind of a personal development program. But journaling is not something you have to do in order to have a stoic practice. I think a lot of people will try to convince you that that's not true, but they're also trying to sell you journaling programs. So keep that in the
Oh,
back. Just keep that in the back of your head.
so, and I just want to tap on that, Tanner, because every people that listen to my show know that I am a big journaler. I journal daily, and for different reasons, but it is the one of the cornerstones of my spiritual contemplation hour or two
Mm,
is to do some journaling, whether I've read parts of your book and then I start journaling, or I journal because there's something on my mind that I'm trying to reason out, come to a better conclusion of,
mm.
that kind of stuff. I think it's a huge thing to do if you enjoy writing.
If you
So
enjoy writing, and if you are using it as a tool of moving closer and
yes,
closer to, at least stoically, it's not the only way you can journal. Of course, you can journal any way you wish, but in order for it to be beneficial to your stoic practice, you're journaling in a way, you're prompting yourself to think about your moral wisdom, or your lack
yes,
thereof, and how you might gain it. With all that said, I do think journaling is helpful to a lot of people, if not for any other reason, that it connects them to some organic downtime, which I don't
yeah,
think that we get a lot of today. And the
mhm,
Stoics did say connect with nature, capital N, but they also said, go out and touch a tree, like go be in nature, small n nature. And writing isn't necessarily that, but it's something that brings us, helps us to focus on the physical world that seem to be around. I mean, we're around all the time, but we don't seem to be engaged with a lot. So I think the mere fact that it helps you to slow down and think makes journaling helpful, period. And then whether or not it could be helpful to your stoic practice is totally beside the point, but it could be. And that might be one practical way that you could build a stoic practice. I would suggest, although be careful about this, because there are plenty of programs that say they're stoic journaling programs or stoic writing programs, and they are not, which is fine. But if you're going to write for a pursuing virtue reason under the while practicing Stoicism, I would suggest that you find prompts for that, because you don't want to sit down and say, "Dear journal, today I got angry for someone cutting me off in traffic, and I don't know, I kind of feel like I should have, but maybe I shouldn't have." Like, that's not the kind of journaling that is helpful
Right.
for your Stoic practice.
So what are some journaling prompts then, Tanner?
Sure. When was the last time you got really upset with somebody? And what was it about your own character that person set off in you? And then how come? Where do you think that comes from? And
Mm-hmm.
is that problematic?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that behavior say about what you understand about appropriateness and about virtuous behavior? Is that behavior reflective of someone who is progressing towards the achievement of moral wisdom? And if the answer is no, how come it's not that? And if you know that, how come you're not acting differently? And
Yeah.
it's not just a matter of realizing that you could be acting differently, of course. I mean, we all might know we're not, of course, we all know that we're not behaving well all the time. I got mad at my 9-month-old son the other day because he threw food in my face and it got on my beard. I shouldn't have gotten mad at him. He's a child, a very young child. But sometimes we don't behave the way that we wish we would.
Mm.
And something that Stoics are, I don't think they use the term habituate. At least I don't know that they ever did. I use it, that what we're really trying to do is habituate certain behaviors until they become reflexes. And there are some Stoic, I wouldn't say they're not theorists. It'd be hard to be a Stoic theorist these days. But there are Stoic academics and Stoic writers who would disagree that Stoicism is a practice of habituating behaviors. But when you're reflecting on your own behavior and then you're endeavoring to change it, what are you doing other than habituating the actions that are associated with this knowledge that you have before it? Because you know you shouldn't act this way. And so
Right.
you're going to try to act differently more and more and more. I call that habituation. And I think Stoicism is really a philosophical practice of habituating morally just behavior as much as we can, as frequently as we can,
Mm-hmm.
all day, every day, for as long as we live, if we're so inclined to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I hear you and I agree with you on that. The becoming a kind and ethical person requires work. It requires self-investigation. And it's not a one done, it's not like, oh, now I know the answer of why I did that. So now I don't, oh, my mom made me do it that way. So that's no, in order to continually grow, my daily do, Tanner, as you know, is spiritually, which is philosophically, um, as well, then you've got to ask the hard questions of yourself.
Hmm.
And like you said earlier, it's not that what's going on out there that's defining me. It's going within and saying, okay, where am I? In fact, talking about your podcast again, you mentioned that at the end of a day, you could journal 3 questions. What
Hmm.
did I do well? What didn't I? And where can I improve, or something like that? And
Yep.
and and that's a good question, or to set it up that way. What do I intend to do well today?
It's also a good start. It's a good place to
Yep,
start.
at the beginning of the day.
If you go through Marcus's meditations, of which I think there are 11 books, and I want to say there are like 475 meditations in total.
Wow.
His first early meditations and his last ones, like, you can see that he's not the same guy at the end. He has a much deeper. He's journaling differently, let's say, by
Yeah,
book
yeah,
11
yeah.
than he was in book 1. And you will be too if you decide to take that practice up. You'll at some you'll start with like what you just outlined, and then you'll find good prompts online that you can use, and then a year or two after that you'll be all on your own. You'll be able to know how to journal for with your best interests in mind, with your pursuit of virtue in mind.
Well, I totally appreciate you and Kai doing this, creating this book. because it's
Thank
a
you.
good little, it's a great, good little, I don't mean to diminish
No,
it,
it's fine.
but
It is a little book. It's a
it's
little
a
book.
little book.
That's intentional.
And especially after you just said that there's 11 volumes of
Yeah.
Aurelius's meditations, I'm not going to go read those right
Mhm.
now. But this is a great go-to. I'm getting huge chills, huge affirmation, because why wouldn't we all want to live a morally excellent and ethical life?
Yeah.
To me, that's the whole purpose and reason why we're here on planet Earth, is to develop and to grow our soul to a higher frequency, which is a moral and ethical and virtuous, to me, um, existence.
Yeah, we want to be morally perfect people. Who wouldn't want to be a morally perfect person? I
Well,
mean, if some people are like, "Well, that's no fun. I don't want to be. I want to be fun."
yeah, and I do still have a list. I'll work on it,
Yeah,
Tanner. I promise. We'll talk later in the year, and I'll say, okay, I got rid of that list
yeah,
of those people that don't want to. But and that's on me, right? That is my inner question of why I think those people out there, are the vicious. But that's
but
on me,
and
because
that's
that's how
another
I
thing
see
is
it.
that those people have no impact on. Actually, it's interesting. Those people have no ability to stop you from pursuing a virtuous character. So they are in different things. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, as we kind of talked about earlier with the sick mother example, how you interact with those people, what your motivations are in addressing those people or dealing with them in whatever way whatever language you want to use, that is a reflection of what you know about what is moral and appropriate. And in that way, nothing is really an indifferent thing because if you know about it, you have to choose about it, you have to think about it, which is engaging your rational faculty and thus any amount of moral knowledge that you might have. And if you have to interact with them, well, how you interact with them is a reflection of the same thing. So they are
Yeah, yeah.
indifferent, but they are also kind of like a nexus or a crossroads at which your level of moral knowledge is tested. And keeping that in mind is probably worthwhile, at least I think.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Tanner. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for writing this sweet little book, What is Stoicism? Because for me, it's answered a lot of questions. And as I said earlier, it's a great book for me to use in my morning practice of contemplation. So
That's great.
I
Thank you.
thank you for that. And thank you for just being here and being so clear and humble. You are excellent
You're gonna
in
make me,
my view.
well, don't say that given our conversation. I'm not excellent.
No, but you
I'm working
understand.
on it. I'm working on it.
So thank you so much. And everybody will have his podcast, how to access that and how to get in touch with him. And he's got a blog and all that stuff. And also his co-author, Kai Whiting, will have his information in the show notes. Thank you so much
Sure.
for being exactly who you are, Tanner Campbell. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me be exactly who I am, Susan. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And I'm just going to end with, and so it is. Namaste.